Hello, welcome to Calumet Roundtable, the first show of 2017, the year of the rooster. I'm your host, Lee Artz from the Department of Communication, and I'm joined today by two guests. One is Dr. Evelyn Bottando, who is a former graduate of our master's program at Purdue and also got her PhD at the University of Iowa and is now an assistant professor in communication at the Indiana University Northwest, just up the road. And we are also joined by Jessica Renslow. She's a documentary filmmaker for Miller Spotlight in the Miller community in Gary, Indiana, and she has been worked in Hollywood and film production for several years, and now she's back in our region. So I'm happy to have both of you here. Our topic today is Standing Rock and the protests in defense of Native Americans' water and the environmental protection of the water in Standing Rock. And both Eve and Jessica have completed a film called, if I can say it correctly, Mini Wiconi, Water is Life. Eve was at Standing Rock, and between the two of you, you created a documentary. I'd like to begin maybe with getting some background for even why the Standing Rock protests exists. I do understand that it's the Dakotas. The Sioux are actually Dakotas, Lakotas, Nakotas, and for thousands of years they had a America great. Not exactly in their interaction with the American settlers, and several treaties were broken, and there was Custer's last stand, but they've kind of, in our history books, in Gary and Hammond, they probably are now something that people generally don't think about, but they suddenly burst forth last April, I believe. Maybe you can give us some background. Do you want to go first?
What had happened was that Energy Transfer Partners had a design for the pipeline that was going a little bit north of the Sioux territory.
And it's an oil pipeline. Right?
It's an oil pipeline. This is for that shale oil.
Yes.
And
it's coming from Canada.
Coming from Canada, but it's also coming from the upsurge in oil and gas, trying to get that out of the...
Oh, is it also coming from the Dakotas?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the thing about it is this area where the planned pipeline was moved to was sacred land of the Sioux. And the local librarian
Is it sacred land? It's sacred land by the Sioux, but is it protected by treaty now, or is it something that the U.S. took away and don't have a claim to? Is that part of the...
That's the debate. They actually sued the United States of America and
recently?
won. They've been suing them since about the 20s.
Okay.
And they won in the 70s, and they actually got several millions of dollars given to them and an apology, but they didn't get the land back, so they've never actually taken the money.
So
it
this
just
land that's
there.
in dispute,
Yeah.
do Sioux live on the land now? Or is this land like in trust? Is it private land?
This is land that's a part of their daily life. I could definitely describe it as such. Having traveled there, when you get there, the route that I took, I went from South Dakota. I stayed at the Grand River Casino on the reservation in South Dakota, and then I traveled north. It's all Sioux reservation. It goes beyond the North Dakota, South Dakota boundaries.
And a recognized reservation.
It is absolutely recognized.
And Standing Rock is on the reservation, or it's off the reservation?
It looks as if it's slightly off, but it's really within the boundary lines.
Okay.
Especially within the original treaty.
Yes.
The way they got the second treaty was illegally done by starving out the Sioux and also not having the right number of male elders sign on.
They should have built a wall.
So it's very big. It's literally they're still fighting over Custer's last stand.
One more piece that would be helpful for our viewers to know is that when you say there's a pipeline and it goes through this part of Dakota, it also is crossing a river, major river.
Yes.
And
it's actually going underneath.
Yes, okay.
That's the proposal. The proposal at the time when I went was to drill underneath one of our largest bodies of fresh water, the Missouri River.
The Missouri River. Okay.
And with several very rare and important ecosystems, they're going to go under that with a pipeline for oil.
And also the neighboring city had voted not to have it go through their city.
Correct.
What was the city?
The nearest city that was...
Well, Bismarck definitely didn't want it.
Yeah, I remember seeing that there was the original pipeline was to go near the city, but the city council or the voters, whatever, said we don't like it, so they moved it. I don't know how many miles away, and that's when it became a question of the Standing Rock sacred ground. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So you were there when? Because this is the first instance of protests that I am aware of was sometime in April 2016, and then as time went on, it was more than simply the tribe, the Lakota tribe that was resident there, and it became a larger and larger symbol of both protection of the water and protection of sacred lands. So that's from April till now. We're talking 8 months. So when were you there?
I was there on Thanksgiving Day.
How ironic.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's how I live my life.
Yes.
So I left during the break at the university, and my best friend and I got in the car, and we traveled to Standing Rock and brought some cameras with us, and also a lot of supplies. The Northwest Indiana community I reached out to just over Facebook, and a lot of people donated supplies for me to take with to Standing Rock for the people staying there. The conditions were quite cold. Before we arrived, there had just been an instance where the policing entities had sprayed people with hoses. And it was very cold. And in order to be sprayed with water in that temperature, you were putting people in harm's way. A former student of mine, Ben Young, actually had posted on Facebook that they wanted people to check in at Standing Rock so as to avoid any police trying to find out where people were. I had just taught a bunch of media studies courses to this specific student as well as others that were responding, and everyone was confused about the information. And I thought that as an information source to at least apparently 1,426 friends on Facebook, that I could go on my own and I could be a source for people. So when you had competing and conflicting information, you had the sheriff saying these folks are dangerous, I thought it would probably be good to, as a matter of research, as a matter of education, as a teacher, as just a citizen who cared, to go out there and document and let people know what was going on with my camera, with my friend, and to let people know the story of that experience.
So you carried a little camera?
Yeah, I had a little Lumix.
Okay. And you were at Standing Rock?
Yes.
And did you tape interviews? I mean, is the documentary interviews with participants, witnesses? Did you interview the occupying army or the police? I mean, did you interview only the people that were on the reservation and at the encampment?
The focus of our documentary is actually going to be a trip from Indiana out to Standing Rock. So we're actually doing an angle, and I'll let Jesse speak a little bit more about that, that discusses how it is that we had Indiana police at Standing Rock.
Lake County Police.
The Lake County Police went from here to Standing Rock?
Yeah.
That is correct.
One of the things that was reported in the media was that there were several police departments in Dakota that refused to participate. The police chief and their deputies said, we're not going there because, what was the reason they would not participate?
They wouldn't
aware of that?
state.
They wouldn't state. Ours is actually through our Homeland Security office.
It is.
For
For
people.
Native Americans wanting sites is a question of
And not-
security for the.
And not even that, just also, it's actually a First Amendment question, like they're doing religious ceremonies. Could you imagine sending cops from another state into a church? Like, that's just bizarre while you're doing, like, communion. It's just really kind of a crazy thing to wrap your head around.
Well, part of it might be the marginalization of
Yes.
Native peoples and Sioux in
Yes.
particular,
That
because
little
they're
thing.
not right. It's not really a culture. It's not really a religion. It's almost like a magic or a shaman type thing, and it isn't treated. It isn't understood that way. But
Yeah, so it's peaceful protests and religious ceremonies, and then they have to have
okay,
our
one
cops
more
there.
question before I ask you to talk about the film and the making of the film, which has to do with the media and the coverage of it. Because the other thing, in addition to the demonstration, there were two other things. One was the presence of the veterans, which I'll ask you about in a minute. But the first was journalists that were arrested and journalists that were assaulted and journalists that somehow were treated. I may be wrong. Some journalists were arrested for threats to national security as well, or is that an overstatement? I remember Amy Goodman from Democracy Now!
Amy Goodman was arrested.
Yes.
I was not there for that arrest.
Was that before or after?
Before I arrived.
Okay.
But it was part and parcel why I went, because she's known for her credibility as a journalist, and I've been following her for many years. In fact, since I took your class here at Purdue University Northwest. I believe that there's a lot we have to question when it comes to the kinds of laws that were invoked and the kinds of policing that happened. Because there are ways for you, if you were a policing entity, for you to request help as a sheriff in North Dakota, and to request help through Homeland Security. That is if there's a man-made or a natural disaster happening. And so through loose interpretations of wording, you can bring in extra police from outside. And I believe that when it comes to the way that journalists were treated, there was still the same slippery slope with the way that the law treats the language of the law that contributed to people being abused and put into prison unjustly.
Who made the call, though? Was it the local police? Was it the state police?
It was the sheriff. Sheriff of Morton County.
Sheriff of the county put out the call.
Right.
And then Homeland Security responds to that.
And each area has their own kind of Homeland Security group.
Okay, there's so much. I know we're not going to get everything done in this one show, but we need to take a quick break right now. This is the Calumet Roundtable, and we'll be right back.
You were on the air at WXRT, I think, the day John Lennon died, right?
Yeah, I was.
And that was during your broadcast, am I right?
It was, but it was a specialized broadcast called This Week in Chicago.
One of the things that was noted when you look across the country that Chicago has a much higher incidence of police shootings than others. So let me ask you this, is it because Chicago is a more violent community? Does Chicago have more people that confront police in a way that's not done the same way in New York or LA?
Do you think you look at things differently than other musicians because of your own experience?
One of the beauties is people say conductors live because they're doing this all the time.
Yeah.
I think conductors live a long time because you're just growing.
Welcome back to Calumet Roundtable from Purdue Northwest in Hammond, a student-produced interviewing show. We feature scholars and guests on important media and communication-related topics. Today we're talking about the Standing Rock protest. My guests are Dr. Bottando from Indiana University Northwest and Jessica Renslow, who's a documentary filmmaker. And just before we went to break, I was going to ask you about the video that you and Eve, the documentary that you are producing. Can you explain to me a little bit about it?
Well, when Eve came back from her trip, we looked at the B-roll, which is just general footage you get when you're shooting a documentary, and trying to find the core story that we were going after, because we knew ours would be a little different as we are not members of the tribe, and we have backgrounds both in documentary making and First Amendment and communications in general. And my master's is actually in education, so I always kind of look at stuff from an educational standpoint. And so as we were starting to pull it apart, we started asking, well, who are our locals there? why was this happening? Why were local cops?
Oh,
This is-
good. Try to make the connection why
Yeah,
it
you
matters
know
for the
what, you know.
public in Indiana. Why would they be?
Well, and I mean,
yeah.
our state's called Indiana for a reason.
Yeah.
You know, and she lives right
Good
by
point.
Indian boundary. Like
Right,
we have all
good
these
points.
like residual historical markings that we don't really think about. And
Yeah.
if this is a story about a treaty that's over 100 years old, how does that work? And then with my work as a community builder in Gary, I work with the cops a lot. And our police generally are pretty nice, and I know them personally, but that's community policing. And that's a lot of relationships that are worked on over time for events, and even as a protester for the Immigration Detention Center movement this
So
year.
did you interview local police for this documentary?
Yes, yeah. We're in the
Okay.
process of that because we're not totally done with post yet, but yeah.
Because I saw on Viceland the Rise videos they've done on the Standing Rock protests, which really is from the Sioux point of view. There's a young woman that's the primary narrator, and they give the history of that, including the conciliation with some of the religious leaders and Army vets, which I thought was quite moving. But you didn't. Your take on this, your documentary, is something with another focus. And
Very different focus. It's really to ask folks, you know, a little bit, follow the money. Where are your taxes going? How does Homeland Security work in little counties in Indiana, or big counties as we
so
have?
you said Indiana cops ended up at Standing Rock.
For 2
How did
weeks.
that happen? For 2 weeks.
Yeah, as the sheriff in Standing Rock, Monroe County, he called in, and then
To Homeland Security.
our Munster police chief, who's our representative for Homeland Security, sent, was it 2 officers, I think?
2.
2.
So this went nationwide, and then every police department could decide whether they wanted to?
Yeah, if
Or
they
are
were,
they
if they were the
required to?
Homeland, yeah.
If they're part of Homeland, they have to, or they can decide to?
It sounded like they had the decision because they brought them back after they got so many complaints. Lake County residents called them and
Oh,
said.
what happened? What happened?
Lake County residents called them and said, why are our officers over there? So they did bring them back after 2 weeks.
So there was a connection here?
Yeah.
People that did not want?
Yes, so that's kind of the gist of our
Taxpayers
story.
didn't want their dollars
They
being
said,
used
"Why
to
are we
beat up
doing- if it's First
Sioux
Amendment?"
people in
Yeah.
Standing Rock, and they actually brought them back.
Yeah.
Amazing. And
It
that's in
may
the
have
video.
been a couple of things. It may have been both the police themselves deciding to disengage from that event, as well as the pressure from citizens constantly calling their local police departments.
It would be interesting. That's another documentary to
Yeah.
talk to the.
So-
Because I mean, obviously, when there's police departments that just don't participate, and they don't want to make a big political statement, but you have to assume they didn't participate because they weren't
Right.
completely in support of it. And then when you have, I don't know how many veterans showed up, thousands of veterans show up. It's like, this is not exactly a unanimous decision to put the pipeline through the sacred grounds under the river by the Sioux. It seems more like ETP, and not even at that moment the government, because I understand that the Army Corps of Engineers said, okay, we're stopping this, but that's been reversed.
It's been reversed. And when you look at it, so you have maybe 10,000 people at Standing Rock, right? Well, we had what, 250,000 in Chicago over a week ago.
Right.
I personally know the woman who was the Grand Marshal there. It was just her and one officer leading that entire group. And there were no arrests and there was no violence in Chicago. And that was a peaceful protest. And that wasn't a religious ceremony, it was just a peaceful protest.
Do you address this in the
We address
documentary?
different types of protests and protest culture, and we're asking a lot of questions as to why this overkill in Standing Rock. It doesn't make any
Well,
sense.
there's several things that I would like to, because part of it to me is the fact that there were at the top end 10,000 people at Standing Rock, but it received international coverage.
Yep.
And it changed a federal decision, and it actually stopped it, which is quite a lot of political power for 10,000 people. Of course, they were from around the country, other Native American tribes, and I think the vets, the fact that the vets showed up, and I think the fact that the journalists were arrested and tased or whatever, I mean, all of those things, kind of puts the protest on, enhances the political power?
And it went on for quite a long time.
And it's not done yet,
Yeah.
is that
It's
correct?
not done, and they won't stop.
Right.
There's 2 different kinds of solidarity happening that you've mentioned. There is a solidarity that is spoken of as the blue line. The blue line is the connection between police officers and different policing. So maybe you don't have several police officers saying, I left Standing Rock because I didn't believe I should be there. You won't hear that.
Yep.
In fact, I have heard
Probably not say that out loud.
Right-wing radio had the opportunity in North Dakota to actually interview one of the police officers, and he discussed how violent the protesters were. In fact, they were slinging nuts, like nuts and bolts. Nuts whizzing past his head is what was the quote from that. Well, so that won't be stated. Then there's the solidarity of veterans. And veterans decided together that this was important, that they stand up and they go united.
Well, because some of them have been to like Iraq and protecting sacred sites of various Muslim divisions, and they've complained about ISIS destroying religious. It would seem like if you're a vet that would be seen as quite hypocritical, that here right on your homeland they're destroying sacred mounds the same way that you condemn somebody in Syria for destroying it. So I can understand that, which...
You have to understand the gravity of the situation. This is unprecedented in history.
Which? Put that all together.
The protest, putting it all together, veterans standing up for Standing Rock in North Dakota, in the United States of America, where Homeland Security has been used to bring in police from all over the United States that aren't regulars there.
It was more than veterans that were just I mean, there are Native American veterans, but
it was the
more,
largest gathering of Native tribes.
Was General Wesley Clark there, or did he simply provide a statement? Because I had witnessed, I think other viewers probably had witnessed, that he made an apology on behalf of soldiers to Native Americans for the breaking of treaties for 100 years and the killing of women and children, and it was quite a powerful statement. Was he?
I wasn't there for his arrival.
But he was there.
I can't speak to that. I haven't looked that up before today, but I will.
Okay.
But there is video out there of the Sioux elders and veterans doing reconciliation ceremonies. Mm-hmm. It's just amazing. The last day that I was there, the last set of B-roll, I went from Bismarck going south. Now this is the route that your police are taking to get there. So when I got there, there was a car that went past me that was obviously a little lost. They were from Native tribes in Canada, just traveling down. That's how immense this is.
So your documentary is trying to make a connection between the historic nature of defense of Native rights, defense of sacred religious rights, responses by veterans, and, which we haven't talked about at all, the environment and the protection of water and the destruction of the earth in one sense, at least the exploitation of natural resources. So all of this happens, but you're not doing that per se. Your documentary is making a connection with what does the public interest of Northwest Indiana, or what can we learn from our experience here that is applied there, or vice versa?
Well, and also how important are local voices? How do we actually impact a place like Standing Rock? By asking questions like, why are our officers going there? You know, we've been very focused nationally lately with, presidential election, but, sometimes really local questions have a really big impact. So that's kind of what we're exploring.
Well, certainly. I mean, it's a dramatic thing, and I think you can. I mean, when we think about communication and the democratic voice of the population, it isn't always expressed, or you get an opportunity in a ballot box. But here's an example where it's expressed with 10,000 people on native lands in Dakota, and it changed the decision, at least temporarily, of the Army Corps of Engineers in the White House. But I would say the same thing about the recent around immigration and the response to the hastily conceived ban on immigrants from certain countries. They've backed off of that, not completely, but they've backed off it considerably, and you have to make the same thing that I'm understanding you're putting in the documentary, that there's a relation between what you might do locally, what you might think nationally, and how you can act upon that. So
It's very easy to get disenfranchised and cynical and not think that you have power, but you do. And we're asking people to ask those questions.
So it's, again, I'll probably mess the word, but Minnie Wicconi? Wicconi. Minnie Wicconi, Water is Life. Is there a subtitle that makes the connection to Indiana, or is that just?
That's going to be more, we'll have to talk about that.
Show, don't tell.
Okay.
Show, don't tell.
And where's the plan at? Where are you now in the process of the production?
We have wrapped most of our interviews and we're doing the post part, and we're hoping for an April entry into festivals.
And and how long is it?
It's going to be a half hour, 28:30 probably.
Oh, suitable for public broadcast then.
I cut my teeth in TV, so I'm the 28:30 or 45:30. So.
Okay. One last question. Has this appeared in your courses? Have students, when you came back, did they say, Dr. Bottando, what happened? I mean, does it link to the topics and the content of the courses that already existed?
Well, I've been pretty lucky in that I stay connected to both students who are at the university as well as students who've graduated. I know it's made a tremendous impact on our graduates because they're looking to us now for people that are going to set examples so that they know that they have people to trust in the world that are going to do their job. In the classrooms, I've certainly brought it in. I bring it in as part of public speaking. What does speech mean? Why is speech important?
And there's a good place to end, because we know that credibility matters, that the proper tone and style and outrage matters, and the proper logic matters. And I think I look forward to seeing all of those in your documentary that will be out in April. So thank you, Dr. Bottando, and thank you, Jessica Renslow. I'm Lee Artz, and thank you for joining us at Calumet Roundtable. Have a great day.